Hi Legion, John Hittler, co-founder of Evoking Genius and co-creator of the Genius Discovery Process, with another edition of Pure Genius. Hey, you like to work and play as your best self, don't you? Dealing from abundance, dealing from your highest values for your what we call your best self. Well, I do too. But you know, there's times when, I don't know about you, but I work out of scarcity or anger or pettiness. As human beings, we all do. Well, what if you could permanently transform the way you play to improve constantly? That's what we're going to do today on Pure Genius. You know, I coach CEOs, entrepreneurs, and team leaders to create lasting behavior change by making transformation safer and more attractive than standing still. Today, here's what we're going to do. We're going to give you 2 questions and 1 technique to have you work from a level of power as opposed to force. See the distinction? Here, I'll give it to you really quickly. Force is exerting, here's an exercise of dominance in order to succeed. That's force. Power emanates effortlessly and generates no counterforce. That's how we describe power. That's the difference. Today what we're going to teach is 2 questions and 1 technique to have you play more often out of power or abundance than out of force or scarcity. Want to play? That's great. Let's spin the big wheel. All right, well, to start with, what we will acknowledge first and foremost is any shift in transformation, human transformation, generally starts with a choice. It's amazing how easy it is to choose to have a good outlook on life or to have a petty outlook on life. And we both know people who are in that camp. You say, well, they're petty or they're victims or they're grouchy most of the time. And you know what? Fundamentally, that's their choice. And then we also know people that say, you know, they always see the bright side of things. They bring out the best in people. Same thing. They choose to do so. So much of life works this way. And the concepts we're going to take on today fit that category really well. It's really about making a fundamental choice of who do I want to be. Now, as a backdrop, the technology, if you will, or the source material we're using is from a book I read every other year at least, and it's by an author named Donald Hawkins, Dr. Donald Hawkins. He's a PhD psychiatrist. I'm not a big psychiatry fan, but his theories are interesting. They come from the chaos theory and quantum physics. Who knew? Well, great. Here's what Hawkins' basic claim is. He claims that there are levels of consciousness which create or which equal an invisible energy or an invisible energy field that correlates and determines, it correlates to your personal energy field and determines human behavior. So the higher or the more advanced energy field, the more appropriate, and when I don't say appropriate, I will say the more loving the human behavior. The lower the energy field, the closer you get to scarcity or force, as we just described it. So his theory is pretty revolutionary, and he backs it up with quantum physics. It's a physics theory that he's applying to psychology. Amazing. And his groundbreaking work is called Power versus Force. I suggest you read it. It's very technical at the beginning and then very practical in the second half, but a great read. And you'll be able to tell people that you now know about quantum physics. So you got that move. They got that working for you. So here's what he basically says. There's a spectrum from 0 at the low end to 1,000 at the high end, and the 1,000 is really a theoretical high point. which is really deity, if you will. It would be one with all that is, if you will. 1,000 would equal that, and at 0 you have no power whatsoever. Well, what he claims is that 6 in 7 human beings walking the planet today are below a threshold level that he would call scarcity. So at scarcity, 6 in 7 human beings, not in America, not in the middle class or the upper class, 6 in 7 human beings anywhere on the globe function below the scarcity level, which means only 1 in 7 are functioning above. Are you 1 in 7 or are you 6 in 7? Truth is, there are times when you are probably working from abundance and you are the 1 in 7, and there are other times where you probably fall below and you're part of the 6 and 7. But statistically, if you had to bet, you'd say, gosh, I'm probably dealing in scarcity. So what's it look like? I'm going to print his spectrum in words and highlight 2 of them. We'll show you what those are in a second. From low to high. So at 0 or just above 0, I'll call it 1 or 2, on a scale of 0 to 1,000, is shame. Now think about it. How much power do you have? How much personal power to persuade people, to make a living, to get out of bed, to be full of vim and vigor do you have when you're dealing from the level of consciousness, as Hawkins calls it, called shame? If you're ashamed of yourself, of your body, of your intellect, of your talents, of your family, of your possessions, you don't have much personal power. Anything you take, anything you do is going to require a ton of extra effort because you don't have much power. That's at the bottom of his level of consciousness scale. So I'll work right up the scale. Starts with shame, then guilt, apathy, grief, fear, desire, anger, pride, and I'm going to stop at the level called courage. And courage we highlight in a different color on purpose, because courage on the scale from 0 to 1,000, courage equates to a level that Hawkins says is 200. Now this is that 6 and 7 versus 1 and 7 line of demarcation. When you're at the level of courage, you are now to the point where you can entertain the concept of being in abundance versus scarcity. Anything below that, any of those other levels that I mentioned, you are in scarcity. So courage is the first line of demarcation. It equals the number of 200 on a scale of 0 to 1,000. And 6 and 7 human beings on the planet fall below this level. Wow. Well, let's keep moving up the scale. You then, after courage, you go to neutrality, willingness, acceptance, reason, and love. And love, again, we highlight that in color. Love equals, in Hawkins' scale, 500. Very few people on the planet walk around at that level of 500. Remember, 6 and 7 fall below the level of courage, or 200. So you can imagine how few then are at 2.5 times that, or at the level of love. But love is highlighted because it equals 500. Above love is joy, peace, and enlightenment, and that's his scale. Well, it falls on a spectrum. See if you can locate a predominant mood that you identify with, that you walk around with on a day-to-day basis. Where are you in scale? It's not a judgment of who you are as a human being, but see if you can identify with one of the levels of consciousness, as Hawkins puts it. Now let's play with it. As I said, 1 in 7 is above this level of 200, which means 6 and 7 are below it. The level of, at 500, happiness, love, here's how Hawkins describes that level. Happiness, the happiness and well-being of others eclipses your own self-interest. What a great definition of love. Now you think about it, we do this with children. We say, gosh, I love my kids. And doesn't the happiness and well-being of your children oftentimes eclipse your own self-interest? Of course it does. So with children, we play at that level quite a bit with our own kids. And interesting, you'll hear people though say, well, I kind of spoil my kids a little bit because, why not? And interesting, people say, well, I'm being abundant by giving them more than I should, like spoiling them a little bit. But the funny thing is when you dig below the surface a little bit, oftentimes that seeming abundance or seemingly abundant attitude is really a scarcity mentality. My kids will love me more if I give them things, which is a fear-based or scarcity mentality. So we have to be careful about giving ourselves credit or beating ourselves up for finding the emotional level of consciousness on Hawkins' chart. Oftentimes they can be foolish. They can fool us. So that level of 500 though is interesting because the happiness and well-being eclipses, or of others, eclipses your own self-interest. That's what he calls love. Well, the interesting part with Hawkins' work is he's able to assess or ascribe these values to living beings and dead. What? Well, you can do it by looking at a history of what people did in their lifetime or interviewing people that were around them, and he can actually work this formula. It's a formula in quantum physics. He also applies it to music or cars. You can apply it to all kinds of things. But take something like music. Why is it that classical music, Bach, Beethoven, Mozart, the Beatles, total classic, why is it so enjoyable or just as enjoyable, take the Beatles, 50 years after it was recorded as it was when they first put it out? The reason is if you use his quantum physics application, it's really an equation. The Beatles music has a score above 500. 521 actually is the score. Well, what did we call that? The happiness and well-being of others, or the happiness and well-being that comes from the Beatles music, eclipses their own self-interest. That's why we still enjoy the music just as much today as we did when it was originally released in the 60s and early 70s. Wow. Same with Mozart, same with Beethoven, same with Bach. 300 or 400-year-old symphonies still are enjoyable as they were when they were first released in the 18th century. Amazing. Well, you've got the choice to play in the same way. And we do this at times, and we fall short at other times. That's what being a human being is all about. Our purpose today is to give you 2 questions and a technique, if you will, fall safe or failure proof, if you will, to move you up the power scale and have you feeling better about your own self-assessment. You ready to play? All right, well, first I'll give you some of the statistics that Hawkins gives us. One person, one at the level of 300, equal or can counterbalance 90,000 people below the level of 200. Amazing how much power you have when you get into abundance versus below the scarcity line. One person at 300 counterbalances the energy or the level of conscious or the energy field of 90,000 people below 200. Wow, that's what we call leadership. One person at 400, a level of 400, can counterbalance the energy level of 400,000 people below 200. Amazing. One person at 500, remember that was love, can counterbalance the energy field of 750,000 people below the level of 200. Think, for instance, of somebody like the Dalai Lama, or this young lady Malala, this Pakistani girl who stood up to the Taliban, essentially proclaimed that, of all things, that women should be educated, and she was shot by the Taliban. Well, rather than hating them, she forgave them And her message became incredibly strong because instead of coming back and saying those guys are a bunch of jerks, she said, I have no ill will for them. Her power is generated because there is no counterbalance in terms of force. She's at a very high level on Hawkins' scale, and she can counterbalance 750,000 angry Islamic fundamentalists. Amazing. And we see this, and we can't figure this out until you can put this theory to work. Well, one person at 700. Now the Dalai Lama has been tested or ascribed to this level. Think of the Dalai Lama. Who hates the Dalai Lama? Not very many people. People are afraid of him. But one person at a level of consciousness equating to 700 can counterbalance the energy of 750,000 people. Sorry, 70 million people who live in scarcity. Absolutely amazing. So I think of somebody like the Pope, the new Pope. Why do we like him? Well, it's easy. You don't have to be Catholic or even Christian to like him. You like him because he sneaks out of the Vatican at night to go serve the homeless. Now, is he supposed to do that? No. Are there security concerns with him doing that? Yes. Why does he do it? You know what? He does it because it's the right thing to do, and he's not trying to do it for publicity. In fact, just the opposite. He's saying there are people that are not well off, who are hurting, and I can go out and give them a blanket, or I can have conversation with them, or I can feed them, or pour some coffee down them, and that's the right thing to do. That's why he does it. And that power can counterbalance the scarcity associated with 70 million people. That's why we love the Pope. Well, you get the sense of this? Again, I suggest you read the book. It's fabulous. But let's do the abbreviated version. How can you quickly shift your own context, your own personal context? 2 questions. Remember? Uno, dos. Two questions and 1 technique. Here's the 2 questions. I'll give them to you. You got it? We'll scroll them at the bottom. At any point, you ask yourself, am I working from a position of scarcity, or am I working from a position of abundance? That's one of them. It's scrolled at the bottom, you can see it. I'll ask the same question a different way. Am I working from a position of fear, or am I working from a position of love? It's the exact same question asked 2 different ways. Use the one that works well for you. If you're working from scarcity, you're going to be working in force, which means you need an exercise of dominance in order to succeed. It just takes a lot more energy, either more money, more force, more labor, more time. Something you have to give up in terms of dominance to succeed. If you're dealing in power, your results will emanate effortlessly and generate no counter force. So the question then is, am I dealing in power or force? Am I dealing in fear or scarcity, fear or love, or am I dealing in scarcity or abundance? It's the same question. You can even ask it 3 different ways. Power versus force, abundance versus scarcity, or love versus fear. So that's the question you can ask yourself at any point, and you're at a choice point. You can choose to play in scarcity, or you can choose to play in abundance, and you'll get the corresponding result. Do it over and over and over again. Choose abundance often enough, and you shift yourself into a much more powerful way of life. Well, so then there's all people say, well, okay, great. What if I can't do that? What if I'm not really, the position isn't there to do that? I'm not in the position to do that. Here's the other way to do it. The one technique you can do to move yourself rapidly up the power scale is this. Practice active gratitude. What? Express or practice active gratitude. Now here's what this sounds like for some people, and not surprisingly, they're in a scarcity mentality. They say, well, I don't have that much to be grateful for. I got it. You're in a scarcity mentality. At any given point, you have much for which you can express gratitude, no matter what your situation. It changes who you are, literally biochemically, and in Hawkins' model, from a quantum physics standpoint, it changes who you are when you actively express gratitude. Gratitude is the highway that gets you to joy. And remember, joy sat right above, on Hawkins' scale, it sat right above love. So it's above 500. It's basically about where a Beatles song is joy. The way you get there is through expressing active gratitude. So that's the technique. If you want to shift or choose a different way of being, you can start it right now by actively expressing gratitude. So 3 questions, the same one. It's really the same one asked 3 different ways, or one technique if you want to do that, or do both, and you'll have rapid transformation according to Hawkins' scale. Hey, I know that you watch these videos so that you can transform your life and get better every day. I love that. Absolutely love that, and I'm your partner in doing that. If this was helpful, like and share this with your audience. Chances are you'll help them become more powerful as well. Until we meet again on Pure Genius, all the best.